Benson Studios presents Chapter 3, April 2005. There are some days when it feels as though time is standing still. I still miss her. It's been 5 years, but I still miss her, Victoria said as she gripped onto her coffee mug. Her best friend Amber sat across from her at the local cafe. Amber's green eyes sparkled as she listened to her best friend. It had taken so long for Victoria to open up about her feelings. I can only imagine, Amber replied as she reached out to hold her hand. A warmth flooded between their hands, and Victoria looked deep into her eyes. This simple act of kindness had been enough to grant her the strength to keep speaking. When we found out that she passed away, I think it broke him. I wasn't sure if he knew about her affair, or if the news had come to him as a surprise. I just remember watching him as the police told him. She paused for a moment as a single tear slid down her cheek. His eyes welled with tears. It broke my heart to see him that way. I cannot even imagine the pain, Amber whispered softly and squeezed her hand tighter to let her know that it was all right to keep going. Are you sure it was her, officer? He asked with a desperation in his tone. It was only at that moment that the officer noticed me standing next to him, partially hidden by the wall. Sir, I have more news to share, but it might be better if we do it without your daughter present. Is there someone we could go to speak more privately? The officer said as he watched me intently. There was something about his eyes that told me that he was going to say something he didn't want to say in front of me. It was bad, and that made me want to know even more. My father turned his gaze towards me. His eyes glimmered with sorrow as the tears began to form. Victoria, sweetie, could you give us a few minutes alone, please? He asked with every shred of self-control he possessed. I could hear it in the way his voice trembled. Her words were getting caught in her throat, and Victoria could only sob, her head planted on the table. She quietly wept. Amber stroked her head while she looked around to see if there was anyone watching this scene unfolding. Fortunately, they were the only two in the cafe. Take your time, Amber said. Her words brought Victoria back from her sorrow, and she lifted her head and wiped her eyes. I'm okay, she said softly. I'll continue, if that's all right, she asked. Of course it's all right. I'm here for you, Vicky, she said with a warm smile spread across her face. Okay, so I said, yes, Daddy, and I lifted myself up high enough to show him I wanted to kiss his cheek. He bent down to permit me, and I placed a gentle kiss. I love you, Daddy, I said as I grinned, and he smiled back at me as well. I love you too, my princess. And with that, he stood back tall and proud, and I walked just far enough away that neither he nor the police officer could see me. I listened quietly. What did you want to say that you hadn't already said in front of my daughter? He asked. The tone in his voice rang of frustration and fear. Sir, you see, your wife wasn't alone when she passed, the police officer said. I could see my father's body tense and his hands balled into fists. What do you mean? He said between gritted teeth. The police officer shifted from one leg to the other as he attempted to soothe his own discomfort at being the bearer of this news. It appears it was a murder-suicide. All the evidence suggests that this was a lover's quarrel gone bad, most likely due to the drugs and alcohol at the scene. I froze. Murder? Suicide? I thought, this wasn't real. This couldn't be right. There's no way Mom would do this. She was working. She was always working. When would she even have time for someone else? Drugs? My mother would never use drugs. I felt a rage build at the fact that the police officer was so blatantly lying. Liar! I screamed before I realized what I had done. I quickly covered my mouth with my hands, but it was too late. My father's eyes were on me. They were raised in both shock and horror that I overheard that conversation. Victoria, he called out to me harshly. I gasped and I ran. I ran up the stairs and into the bathroom and locked myself inside. I turned on the shower and jumped in, not even bothering to strip off my clothes. I felt so dirty and so angry and confused. Why would he say those things about my mother? Why would he do that? I cried out as the tears broke through the wall I was so desperately trying to build. I felt lost. My body ached from deep within me, and I could not contain the tears. A short while passed, and I heard a gentle tap on the bathroom door. "Go away," I called. "Victoria, please, we need to talk about this," my father said. I didn't want to talk to him. I didn't want to talk to anyone. "Please," I said with a desperation in my voice, "leave me alone." There was a silence on the other side of the door. "Okay, honey, I'm here for you when you need to talk." I heard a slight thump, and I imagined it was his forehead resting against the door. He needed me as much as I needed him, but I couldn't bring myself to be that for him. The pain was too fresh and too real, and even when we buried her, I kept myself at a distance. The sorrow was unquenchable. My world was shattered. I wasn't sure if I would ever be able to pick up the pieces. I left him, just like she had. Maybe not physically or in the same way, but I had emotionally shut down. I spent very little time at home, and I left him to send to my sister alone. He spiraled, and I hadn't even seen it happening. Her words lingered in the air. She looked up to see her best friend crying. This time, Victoria gripped her hand and held him tightly. "I'm sorry," Amber said softly through her tears. "It's okay. You see, my own sorrow and pain had consumed me so deeply that I lost sight of myself. The presence that I felt shortly after overwhelmed me. That's why I'm sharing my story with you. That's why we're here." She paused. The sadness that was once on Amber's face was now replaced with shock. "Why are we here?" she asked curiously. Victoria paused, looked around the empty cafe, held Amber's hands so tightly that it caused her pain. Amber winced from the discomfort as a new fear suddenly surfaced. "They are watching us,"